Welcome to the Bennett Schmidt Lectures on the Higher Aim of Art at Studio Incamminati, School for Contemporary Realist Art in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. My name is Dan Thompson. I'm the Dean of Fine Arts at Studio Incamminati. We'd like to welcome you to this lecture given by Alvin Holm on the progressive tradition of Studio Incamminati. Longtime member of the Board of Directors of Studio Incamminati, Alvin Holm received his undergraduate degree from Yale in 1958 and his master's degree in architecture from the University of Pennsylvania in 1962. While engaged in the professional practice of modernism, he came to the realization that all old buildings were superior to modern ones. He began to question what it was that made older buildings decidedly lovable and beautiful. He initially took the opportunity to study traditional architecture by applying himself to the craft of restoration. Finding it nearly impossible to learn about old buildings from new books, he surrounded himself with old books. While working in restoration, he began to question why great buildings, such as the historic structure he was working with, could not be built anew if they could in fact be pieced together. Having received encouragement from Henry Hope Reed and inspiration from Pierce Rice, Holmes soon devoted his entire practice to the study and design of traditional architecture. In 1981, he began to teach the principles of classical orders at the National Academy of Design in New York. Alvin Holm AIA Architects is in its 45th year as a small general practice firm specializing in traditional design and historic restoration. While most of our work is residential, we have enjoyed a broad range of projects from a civic fountain in Kansas City to a score of new galleries for the 19th century European collection at New York's Metropolitan Museum of Art. In the Philadelphia area, we designed 2 restaurants for the Irish Pub, a health and fitness complex for the World Gym, and the Visitors Center for Washington Crossing State Park. Large country houses in the classical manner include a Palladian home for Dr. and Mrs. Henry Clay Frick in Alpine, New Jersey, and a Georgian home for Mr. and Mrs. Richard B. Wyatt in Pittsburgh. In the area of historic research and restoration, projects have included work on historic Rittenhouse, the George Reed House in Newcastle, and the Edgar Allan Poe House in Philadelphia. Increasingly, we are performing consulting services for other architects in the areas of classical and historic design. Alvin's teaching career has also spanned many locales over a broad range of years. It includes the Institute of Classical Architecture in New York from 2000, teaching current classical orders and classical composition. It also includes Moore College of Art and Design in Philadelphia from 1994 to 2006. He taught at the National Academy of Design in New York from 1981 to 1996, the University of Pennsylvania in 1983 and 84, visiting lecturer on classical architecture, drawing the classical orders. He taught at Temple University, Drexel University, the Institute of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, I should say the Art Institute of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, as well as Philadelphia College of Art in Philadelphia from 1976 to 79. We welcome Al now to talk about the progressive tradition of Studio Incamminati. I did want to begin with a question, if I may, which is, how long have you been on the board of Studio Incamminati, please?
Oh, I can't remember. I wrote it down and I thought I would remember. 2011, I think I came on the board.
Okay, all right. Wow. We appreciate that. Thank you for that.
Did I get it right? That's the first question. Okay.
Well, would you like to begin the discussion of, your lecture this evening?
Sure. This is going to be a question and answer kind of thing rather than, a lecture from beginning to end. And the first question is, what have I loved about Studio Incamminati? How have I been aboard for so long, and how did I get started? I want to say that the first 40 years of my life was as a modernist. The second 40 has been as a classicist, and the shift came in 1976 when I left the big firm that I had been working in for 10 years, and that was in 1976. And at that point, I began teaching at the Art Institute of Philadelphia. And at that point, um, I met this lovely young woman named Leona. And that is the beginning, I guess, of the long relationship I've had with this group. I don't know whether that was 1976 or 77 or some eight. Leona may know more clearly than that. But I was teaching at the Art Institute of Philadelphia, and I was teaching, I think, architecture history. The second thing that brought me closer to Studio Incamminati was my friendship with Mark Mostovoy, who was on the board from early on. I guess he was one of the founders of Studio Incamminati. And he was also the founder and conductor of an organization called the 16 Concerto Soloists. And I was a member of his board, and I wrote program notes for his concerts, and we were pretty good friends. And he then introduced me to Studio Incamminati. And then I was able to meet Nelson himself. And that's the story of how I came aboard. What was especially impressive about Studio Incamminati for me at that time, and still today, was that it was very much in the manner, teaching in the manner of the 16 Concerto Soloists. Mark's enthusiasm was about this small little orchestra he had that were called soloists. And they were taught, because it was small, they were taught to be soloists as well, leaders as well as followers. And so they all, because it was small, they all got to pay, all 16 sort of rotated, being the leader and being the the choir or the chorus, or the orchestra. It was very much teaching by learning, and learning by teaching, and that continues at Studio Incamminati. That's it for my introduction.
I know that from the very beginning, teaching by example was a big part of what Nelson and Leona had designed into the program. There was very much the discussion of students that would progress to a certain level of proficiency with a skill and share that skill. And that was, I think that was kind of unheard of. I do not recall encountering that anywhere else. And I know that we have tried to continue that tradition. I mean, I really want to ask you a little bit more about the progressive tradition, but we may want to build toward that, because I know that's a prevailing theme and one of your favorites about Incamminati. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, the traditional aspect of this, I mean, this hasn't been going on continuously because there was a big break, which I'm going to talk about at greater length a little bit later at the end of the Second World War. Mm-hmm. Teaching changed radically throughout the arts, but the break was with a 2,500-year tradition, where painters and carpenters and architects and everybody else learned by following, and then moved ahead into a leadership position. So this is part of a 2,500-year continuum. It's not a new idea. It's something, but it had a radical break after the Second World War, which more about later. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I have to ask, because I read your bio a moment ago. You're an incredibly busy man. You've been at this for a long time. You're working with organizations like the Met. I'm sure you were asked to join many different boards, many different organizations. Why did you accept Incamminati and continue with Incamminati? What was it about the school's culture that really drew you to it?
Oh, exactly that, because it's teaching by learning. My own education um, was post-war, of course, and teaching of history had changed, teaching of drawing had changed, and I don't know what the best sequence here to go into that. Are we on question two? How did I make this?
No, I will jump right to question two. Give me a moment, please. So I'll ask you then, when did you switch from modernist to classical traditional work?
1976.
And
I it's an easy date to remember.
why is it an easy date to remember?
Centennial, a lot of
Oh,
things going on. Yeah. And the big firm that I had been working with, 350 architects, had shrunken by then to something like 87 architects or something like that from 350. And it looked like time for me to do something else.
hmm.
I left with a will. I can honestly say I made an effort to bring work into the firm. We had always been modernists, but at that point, the big kinds of projects that we had been doing had been already completed. We were getting out of a little recession, and a lot of organizations had just gone out of business. And the new work looked like it was going to be largely restoration, which our organization had never done before. So I made an effort to bring work into the firm of a restoration nature, but to do that, I had to make some friends with some more elderly architects who had been educated before the war and really knew how to do old buildings. We were unsuccessful bringing new work in, so I left the office in 1976, and the United States at that point started giving benefits to restoration. Uh, Large tax benefits were given to owners of buildings that would renovate or restore in order to preserve the heritage. So I got into the study of old buildings, sort of mentored by some older architects who had been educated before the war. And this was very appealing to me in those days. My experience at the big firm was related to traditional building in a way, because I was the designer of a major project that Vincent Kling had been selected for to continue a major project in Washington, D.C., called the Federal Triangle, which was got a lot of applause. Everybody was amazed, but it never got built because the administration changed, and that's all. But I was able to design in the traditional way by studying the traditional drawings of the traditional buildings that preceded us, and that was my first first experience learning from emulation, actually, literal copying of drawings, and so that got me started in this track. I guess that's pretty much it. I read a book that I had read 20 years prior, called The Golden City by Henry Hope Reed. Came to my attention 20 years later, and it turned me around, and I thought, wow. And I read it in an evening, and I called the author the next day. He was in New York, and he said, "Young man, we've got to have a talk." And that literally was the one event that turned my life around. And he said, "If you're so interested in this, you've got to teach it." I said, "Henry, I never learned it myself." He handed me the book, the text. He said, "I'll set you up at the National Academy of Design, and just stay a couple of weeks ahead of your students, and you'll be all right." So I was actively, well, I did it willingly, but I mean, he really told me what to do, and I did it. I learned by teaching, and I've been teaching it ever since. So this was what? This was 76. This was 80, 86 or something like that. So maybe that's enough. I mean, there's lots more to say, but I think that's enough for how I got to be a classicist.
Could you describe the Bauhaus manner in which you were practicing prior to becoming a classicist, please?
Yes, yes, good. When I was my undergraduate major at Yale was history of architecture, and it was a wonderful teacher that I had, and I followed him for the 4 years. I had him first semester, and continued with him throughout the undergraduate. And the hot thing to do in those days was to follow the Bauhaus, um, which was a break from the 2,500 years of the Western classical tradition. The Bauhaus put that all beside. There's a variety of ways to describe that. The best books have not been written yet. One of the big problems was that Hitler was a classicist and kind of gave a bad attitude to to what Hitler liked. We were all taught not to like. Mussolini was a classicist as well. They were very fond of classical buildings, wouldn't you know? The Bauhaus was a modernist group in Germany, and Hitler couldn't stand them, and they ran away to America and were welcomed. And as soon as the war was over, they had jobs all over the country, and the whole country shifted from teaching traditional history, traditional methods of drawing, traditional ways of appreciating art, into the modernist Bauhaus tradition. All of a sudden, like a switch was pushed, and I thought this was just the way history works. My 4 years of education, undergraduate, and then I moved right into architecture school and studied with Joseph Albers, who is one of the leaders of the Bauhaus movement, and his drawing course taught me how to teach like the Bauhaus. Some years later, after Henry Reed had come into my life and introduced me to Pierce Rice, who was a traditionalist painter, I took his course 5 or 6 times, and then I began to teach it with him. And then I began to teach it in New York. And the difference between the two methods is the Bauhaus idea was that you want to learn to draw a horse, you go find a horse and look at it very carefully and take your pencil and draw it repeatedly, and you'll get better. Pierce Rice's idea was you want to learn to draw a horse in a beautiful way, study horse drawings, copy horse drawings, drawings of horses, study how people ahead of you have learned how to do it, and then go find yourself a horse. Totally different ways. The one relies on tradition. The one is traditional because you learn how to do it by following the guys in front of you and then teaching it and the guys coming along behind, versus the Bauhaus idea of making it up. Forget about the past and do it your own way. And this is the big shift between the tradition, 2,500 years that I'm familiar with, and everything since 1945.
I understand.
As you can tell, I could go on and on about that, but I don't know. Is there any questions about that?
I'd like to ask one, and then I also want to alert our audience that we're very open to questions coming in from all of you. For the sake of cleanliness of editing, for our great editor, post-production master and miser, Jared Fisher, we like to have them all coming from me. So please insert them in the chat box if you have any. I want to just add one of my own, because when I went to London, I was in London on a fellowship a number of years ago. And of course, you go to the V&A, of course, you go to the National Gallery. And I wound up going to Leighton House and toured Leighton House. It was the home of the head of the Royal Academy in the 19th century, Lord Leighton. And we were touring the house, and it was just an extraordinary place with all manner of great, architectural embellishments, mostly a Middle Eastern look. But the docent, who apparently was very knowledgeable, mentioned the 1960s as the era of destruction. He was talking about all of the buildings in that locale, and they'd just been razed to the ground. And it reminded me of what happened in New York with the Singer skyscraper and things that I've read about a little bit. Would you concur with that? An era of destruction?
Yeah.
In the 1860s? When things were being replaced by Bauhaus architecture?
Yeah, for a lot of reasons that still remain to be examined. Traditional buildings were regarded as old-fashioned, passé. Let's get on with this is a new world. Let's get on with it. A fundamental problem, a fundamental shift was that before the war, and as back as anybody can go, beauty was one of the three fundamental elements in painting, architecture, music, everything else. Firmness, commodity, and delight were the three parts that made a building good. Firmness is stability, structural stability. Commodity is functional, and delight is beauty. Fermitas, there's a lot of ways of describing it. But at the end of the Second War, for one reason or another, a variety of reasons that came together, the motto afterwards was form follows function. There were three parts: form follows function, but only two essentials there: the form, fermitas, and function, commoditas, or utilitas. And whatever happened to beauty? Whatever happened to delight? It was just knocked out. And ever after, beauty has been regarded as something that exists only in the eyes of the beholder. It's a good axiom. It's catchy, but it's wrong. Beauty had always been regarded before that as an absolute out there, beyond any of our own eyeballs. The only reason it could be in our eyeballs at all is because it's out there, but it's absolutely out there. And the quest for beauty was integral to pretty much everybody's pursuit. Whether you were a stonemason or a woodcarver or a painter or an architecture designer, you were all moving toward what looks good, what looks beautiful. And the better, the better it looks, the more it moves toward the sublime, the beauty. And this all got washed out very rapidly at the end of the Second World War. With that came the destruction of once beautiful buildings. And that's pretty complicated because it had a lot to do with some good things that came after the Second World War. A lot of young people, maybe third generation carpenters, had an opportunity to go to college for the first time in their family's history, and they put aside their hammer and went into college on the GI Bill. That was a fine thing, but that was one of the ways we lost the tradition. And the other thing is that a lot of the guys that came back from the war were able to, for the first time, buy houses, leave the city, leave the little houses in the city, and move to the suburbs, which brought a lot of rapidly built, sort of cheap buildings in the suburbs, which caused the balloon in the automobile industry, and then lots of big, beautiful buildings in the cities that were now vacant were torn down to make parking places. There was a song, a popular song written about that in those days. So there are a lot of reasons. It's very, very complex. It's very clear when you can look at what was happening and see how they all related. But this is something that I was not taught in the history of architecture, because I was taught to look for the differences between this building and that building. We were always given two screens simultaneous. I mean, on the screen, there were two pictures, and we were supposed to check out the differences. Now, prior to that, history had been taught one picture at a time, and we were taught to review the continuity from one to the next, to the next, to the next, one era to the next, to the next. After the Second World War, we were taught to see the differences, and the new was always the best. And this was very broad. It influenced our vocabulary. It influenced our attitudes. It influenced a lot of the things. And the idea of beauty was dismissed. It's all subjective. It's all in the eye of, whoever's looking. Does that get close to?
It does. I just want to say that I hear what you are saying, and I imagine that if my kids were listening, they would maybe nod their heads and say, "Yeah, that sounds surprising." But I know, because we go down the street to a classic historical park, and we park our car in the location of an absolutely extraordinary chapel that was torn down. And it's exactly what you said. Now it's a parking space. And it must have just been a kind of psychosis that took over humanity to say, let's get rid of this, let's get rid of that. I mean, I can't even explain, I can't even, identify the logic that would make it okay to destroy what they destroyed, just from my own vantage point. I have to say that.
Oh, it's amazing, and I think I think this story has not been adequately told. We haven't really examined it, because when you step aside and look at it from a different point of view and look at the continuity of 2,500 years, you can see, oh, here's one style after another. There's the Baroque, there's the Classicist, there's the Gothic. A lot of different styles, but they were all knitted together. It was a gradual development, and they're all knit together, and they might look different, but they obey the same fundamental principles. And we may be able to get back to that maybe in the next couple.
We will. We have a comment from Pam. It says, this is still happening now in many cities. And she mentioned Baltimore. And I'm sure it is, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. this is slightly off topic, but I was teaching a master class in Shenyang in China, and I was in the vehicle, and they told me that they didn't recognize the city they grew up in because the entire city had been torn down and rebuilt, and I found that surprising. But they said that's happening all over China.
All over the world. Yeah.
Yeah, all over the world.
Yeah.
Well, so if I may,
Yes.
you're saying that one of the principal things about the shift from the Bauhaus uh, to your interest in classical design was beauty, was the concept of beauty, right? Bringing it back.
Yes. Yes. Beauty, absolutely. But was also the idea that well, this gets it to sort of the culmination. I don't know how quick we are, but the idea of tradition is that you stand in the present and you look to the past for all the silly mistakes you've made and the wisdom you've gleaned in order to move into the future. And it's three parts. It's kind of an action noun, so to speak. And it comes from a variety of interpretations where it comes from, but basically trans and dare, do, or give. Dare is I give, to give is done. And it literally means passing on. It means move, taking here and giving there. And it relates to the word trade, literally the verb trade. I give you this and in return for that. There's a motion back and forth. Or the trade schools. And trade schools were all educated. I mean, all had this idea of education that you learn by copying how, just exactly how the hammer is held, how the brush is, and you try to imitate the guys ahead of you who are doing it, better. And then in turn, you turn around and take it, the guys who are coming up. And this is very important to get back. I mean, what the fundamental thing about Studio Incamminati that I adore is that they are carrying on this idea. There's a bunch of you standing in a room looking at the same thing and all doing it and following the guys who are ahead of you, and you're watching them do it and you're imitating them to some degree or another. And that's good. Modernists have rejected imitation because they're looking for creation, something different that nobody's done before. But how you bring those two opposites together is through emulation. You learn from the guys ahead of you, and you join them in seeking the beauty, the best way of showing the body, or whatever. And you compete with them in a way, but you're emulating them because you're moving in the same direction. It's a different kind of competition. It's convivial. You're moving together toward a goal. And this is vital to our survival these days in a deeply divided nation. We really have got to find that, get out of this binary, this digital culture in order to embrace the continuity, the three-part idea of tradition. It's been written that there's what brings the copying and the creation together is the emulation, which is nothing but friendly. Um, and those are the three parts. Three parts throughout the philosophy of the classical tradition. It's the big three. It's the kind of stability of the tripod in so many ways. There's the left and the right, and then as they're bashing their heads together, one or the other has got to rise above the digital and try to find out where that goofy guy is coming from. Try to see the other point of view in order to establish the meaning of the relationship. And that's the mean between extremes. And that's fundamental. As long as they're just, left and right, up and down, black and white, we're going to be bashing our heads as we are today. That mean between is the meaning of the relationship. It's the, I see where he's coming from. I get it. It doesn't mean a compromise. It doesn't mean it, but it means an understanding of what's good about both, points of view. I don't know. That's a little preachy, but
Works for me. May I move to question 3?
3.
Yes.
What's 3?
3 is how and when did we all switch from the Western classical tradition?
Okay. Well, I guess I skipped ahead to that because that was the switch from the Western classical. That was we won the Second World War, and everything changed for a lot of reasons. And some of the negative reasons were what the fascists had rejected was modernism. And so a lot of Americans resented that. And we thought modern was the way to go. So we associated the classical with fascist. And unfortunately, but that was part of the problem. The other parts of the problem were that we needed all kinds of new buildings rapidly, so we made them as cheap as possible. The other part of the problem was we lost so much of the skills that, as I say, third generation carpenters might have had, or masons or something. We lost it, and everything became cheap and mechanical. Plaster, for instance, was always done by individuals with their hands, and it was replaced shortly after the Second World War by sheetrock, which doesn't require a whole lot of personal skills. It's not something you learn from your father and your forebears. It's something that you learn, and it doesn't take a whole lot of skill. And I could go on and on about how architecture has changed, but it has a lot to do with broader cultural issues, like we needed to get a whole lot of new houses built in the suburbs very rapidly, and we needed to tear down a lot of old buildings, and besides, we didn't like the old buildings anymore. And we're slowly getting back to the point where we regard them more highly, and this began in 1976 with the bicentennial, after we took this long backward look and saw how much of Americans' history had been lost, and that's when we started the restoration movement and tax credits for restoration. And but it's taken a long time to get rid of that modernist two-part compulsion to tear it down and build a parking lot. We're getting there, though. Classical America, this group that I helped to found, which is now called the Institute for Classical Architecture and Art. You mentioned that I was president of it, but that was long ago, when it was Classical America, and I haven't been president for a long, long time. But from one major center in New York. Philadelphia was the first chapter outside New York, and we remained that way for many, many years. But now we have, I don't know, 15 or 16 chapters around the country, and it's definitely a conspicuous movement. And in the past, we have tried to work with other kinds of organizations, and we have done things with Studio Incamminati. Notably, some years ago, we had students of Incamminati go to ballet practice, and then we had ballet dancers come and watch the painters, and what each group learned from the other was very enjoyable. I don't know what lasting value it had, and it's the kind of thing we ought to do again. Bring different groups together to benefit from similar points of view.
Yes, yes. The interdisciplinary nature of that's extremely valuable, and we're already working on that in some respect with the medical aspects. May I ask you a follow-up question? We have a lively series of questions in the chat, and so we're all thinking about your extensive experience first as a modernist for many years, and then as a classicist for many more years, and now that you can look back at the Bauhaus movement in architecture, can you see, Linda wants to know, can you see some redeeming aspects of Bauhaus after 40 years of working with it?
Well, yeah, I was very fond of it. My older sister, studied in Chicago with one of the Bauhaus leaders, and she's 7 years ahead of me, I guess. And so she brought me along. So I've been a kind of a Bauhaus boy ever since. And as I say, I did teach in what Joseph Albers had taught me. And I just feel it was very limited and short-sighted. I don't think it's evil. Albers was good. I've got I've got a collection of Albers' work. I have Albers-looking things in my studio at the office. There's lots to be said for it, but what was wrong was that they dismissed the tradition, and they emphasized, it's got to be something new. No, I mean, there are skills in certainly skillful painters in the Bauhaus tradition, but they missed the boat on a whole lot of things, but they endured for almost a century now, 75 years, and but I've totally committed now to the continuity. No, I mean them no ill will, and I don't think it's appropriate for me to stimulate hatred. And when I'm trying to sell amicability, I think we ought to see what's good about them and applaud, and then bring them aboard the Western classical tradition. And when I say the Western classical tradition, I mean all of it is classical, even Gothic, which doesn't look, a bit, but there's a lot in common. The vocabulary is different in the Gothic. A lot of the rules are different. In the true classical, you never repeat a molding. You always vary it. If you have one thing that's concave, the next should be either flat or convex. But in the Gothic, you have concave, concave, convex, 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 convex. I mean, that there are a lot of things that you can do in the class that you can do in the Gothic that you can't do in the classic, and vice versa.
Mm.
But the fundamental rules, are there. Is it time to talk about some of the fundamental rules?
Apparently so.
Well, what the tradition honors is, again, three parts. There's a typical classical column has a base, a shaft, and a cap. And a typical traditional building has a base, a body, and something that surmounts it. And each one is broken down into three parts. For instance, each element is broken, where the most traditional buildings, where the floor meets the wall, there's a three-part base, and the base has a little cap on it and a toe, and it's practical for many ways, but it's also the mediator between the vertical and the horizontal. Go up the wall, and where the wall meets the ceiling, traditionally there's some kind of a molding that unifies the two, the vertical with the horizontal, and that cove molding, or what, usually has three parts itself, and over you get the three. And a good poem has a beginning, a middle, and an end. A good piece of music has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and something that, and they're different. How you end is something memorable. How you begin is something that kind of sucks you in, and then there's the activity, and on and on and on. This is true in all art forms. A good traditional building has a look from a distance, a scale in relation to other things, other buildings and trees. And as you approach, it has another scale that is more related to the pedestrian. And as you walk through the door, it has a third scale, at least a third, where the details are there and what you hold on to as you open the door. And this is true of good buildings throughout history. Whatever you call the style, but the tradition is there. Modern buildings, as you might have noticed, do not have that. The traditional New York skyscraper or Philadelphia skyscraper has something at the base that unifies, that relates to the sidewalk, and then you go up, and there's something at the top that, where it hits the sky, and it makes the transition between the top of the building and the sky, and on and on and on. One of your favorite buildings, what was it that, Dan, you mentioned?
The Woolworth building, no?
Oh God, that's a lovely building, a beautiful building. It's kind of Gothic. It has a lot of Gothic quality to it.
It's a Gothic skyscraper. It's amazing. I mean, it's just spellbinding.
And it looks good from a great distance, and it looks good at every detail. You can crawl up the wall and see the most precious little details high in the sky that you can only see from a helicopter, but it has all these scales, and it has the base, the middle, and the top. It joins the sky in a particularly beautiful way, in a totally different way than it joins the earth. And I believe that it has been recently renovated, so it's going to last for a very long time. All the windows have been replaced with glass for a variety of reasons. Oh yeah, there it is.
Yes, I pulled it up.
Glorious.
Uh,
Yeah.
I happen to have it. It was the tallest building in the world in 1913.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know if you know the story. It was built for a total of 9 million by the five and dime store magnate, Mr. Woolworth, and it was at its completion called the Cathedral of Commerce.
I didn't
But
know.
yeah, please go on. Please go on.
We have a. I'm a Chicago boy. I've been in Philadelphia for a long time, but basically I'm Chicago, and there's a couple of beautiful Gothic skyscrapers in Chicago too. Well, I think I have heard that relatively recently, in recent years, all the windows have been replaced with thermopane in order to cut down on HVA, heating, ventilating, and air conditioning.
Mm.
So this is going to last a lot longer and be a lot
More
yeah.
longevity.
I don't know what it's amazing that the delicacy of the ornament has still looks pretty fresh.
I found two more photos of it. I want you to tell me if you can recognize the gargoyle in the next image.
No, it's not one of my mentors. No, I don't recognize. But I'm sure he's taught me a lot in his way. That's
Yeah.
hilarious and very beautiful.
Yeah.
What was the other one? That was some other.
Oh, I can show you the other building. Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Let's do it. Well, it's a building that was unfortunately demolished in Manhattan, and it looks like this. And it's called Pennsylvania Station. Now, I think this was the second Pennsylvania station, the one that was destroyed in 1963, in favor of the third and current Penn Station, which I think it's safe to say none of us likes the third and current one, right?
I think that's safe to say.
Yeah. So I thought of bringing some of these images to your attention because only you have a certain quality of insight here. This is the interior of the second Penn Station, the one that was demolished. Did you go to this building?
Oh, I remember it very well. Absolutely.
Mm.
Oh yeah, this was demolished not so long ago.
Mm-hmm.
No, this is glorious and great grievances following this and the efforts to save it. I the only time I ever met Jackie Kennedy was when she came to Philadelphia with a group of people protesting the destruction of this this magnificent building. I was I guess Classical America was the name of the organization then, and I was in a little committee that welcomed the group from New York. But I don't know whether you are aware that there is a vigorous movement to rebuild Penn Station.
I'm aware that an effort has been underway for a few years to refurbish, rehab, or repurpose the current building, which is called the post office. I believe it's a block south of the old Penn Station.
Well, there's an effort, an organization called the National the National Civic Art. Oh my gosh, I should know. I'm a member. They are putting it. They're doing a lot, and there are architects working on you know how it can be done, and the big because all the drawings are apparently available. I mean, it would be possible to do it. It cost a pretty penny. However, they can sell the air rights of the site to an adjacent site and make a whole lot of money and make it possible to rebuild this two or three story building in a fairly economic way. So it's glorious. It's absolutely glorious, and I remember it very, very well. But it's altogether possible that it can be redone, and it seems to make a lot of sense.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Shall I move on to another question?
Yeah. Are there buildings that I've done that you want to show?
Certainly. I'd like to show some of your work. I was waiting for that prompt. Give me one moment, please. Let me go back.
Where are we? Tradition fundamentally progressive. I guess we've talked about that.
I think that's an excellent place to go. How and where would you describe tradition as fundamentally progressive? And I think you've spoken about Incamminati in those terms, correct?
Yeah, Incamminati, I guess everybody knows, means on the road, and it means moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what tradition refers to. It's moving forward. It's looking to the past, standing in the present, moving forward. And if you don't know where you've been, it's not easy to know where you're headed. It's very important. This is, of course, one of my very favorite projects. And I guess you don't have any pictures of what it looked like before they invited me to redesign it.
Oh, goodness. I would love to see that. I just wanted to comment that, I mean, first of all, I would love to hear you talk about this project, but secondarily, I don't know that any of our community have known when they walked up that long hallway and got to the Rodin Age of Bronze that you had a massive hand in redesigning this space.
Yeah, well, you're not supposed to, really. I mean, the fact that my work is looked at and assumed to be the work of somebody in the last century, I've gotten used to that. I'm sort of pleased. I mean, that's my goal. I don't want to. This is not about me. It's about the the tradition. I love this photograph, but I love the whole project. That I guess there are 22 galleries new that I designed, each one a different, some large, some small. So there's a nice sort of rhythm to moving from one to another, high ceilings, lower ceilings, narrow, broad. And all this is built within what really looked like an old airplane hangar.
Mm.
It was one enormous space. These 22 galleries are divisions now of this enormous building that was just one single space, and all those fabulous paintings were mounted in beautiful, elaborate golden frames, common to the 19th century. This is the 19th century European collection, as you see.
Mm-hmm.
And the beautiful paintings were in beautiful frames, but the beautiful frames were hanging on 8-foot partitions, 8 by 12, just movable partitions that they never moved. And people complained about getting lost, and it was an unnerving experience for most people for the first several years that it was open, until they decided that, boy, this is a terrible environment for the beautiful 19th century paintings. So they looked around for somebody to design the building and the new wing in the manner in which the old wings, the whole building had been designed. And at that point, there weren't not Well, at that point, I was teaching the courses at the National Academy, which is right down the road. And somebody said, "Well, there's a fellow down the street, who teaches this stuff. Why don't we ask him?" I got a call from New York one day. I was at my office here in town, and it said, "We'd like to talk to you about something. When are you going to be in New York?" And that was it. It was. I can trace the relationship. I think it was basically Henry Hope Reed, my mentor, who gave them my name. But it wasn't like I won a competition or anything. There's nobody else was doing it. So
But I mean, you must certainly be aware of the incredible mass of people. I mean, but by this time, your work here having been done in 1991, 1993, millions of people must have passed through this space. I mean, undoubtedly, and that must be very gratifying to you to know that your space has been visited in droves, literally. I mean, this is where the Van Goghs are. This is where the Monets are. We all know this space. We've all been in this space multiple times, looking at the Bastien Lepage on the wall. You created this space. It's amazing.
yeah, well, I'm very, very happy about it. I love looking at the picture. It's not on my mind all the time. And it's funny, but the fact that nobody asks who did it means that I'm doing the right thing. I'm not. A lot of modernists like to express their time, and that's one of the problems. They don't want to do something that's not going to be identified with their particular moment in time, and that's what's wrong with modern architecture. It has no endurance. It might look kind of bright and cheery, when it's new, but 3 or 4 years down the road, and it's tiresome. Whereas this looks bright and cheery continuously.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, it's lovely.
Picture. Yeah, good.
Yeah, fantastic.
Well, yeah. Let me notice here the base, the shaft, and the cap for the columns, and then everything relates to the next thing, and there are elements that create that relationship. So the three parts are here everywhere you look. The larger scale and the smaller scale, and what you see at one, and then you look close and you see something else, and follows all the way through. Yep. Next.
All right.
Whatever.
So our next example of your work, if I can pull it up, is Overbrook Farms in Philadelphia. I thought we could bring the second one to Philadelphia, and maybe you could discuss this project a little bit, please.
Well, this is another favorite of mine. Wonderful client. It was a handsome building to begin with, this portion, and then it had an addition made to it that was pretty good, but it was a private home. And many years later, it became an institution. So it's no longer anybody's home. So things that were bedrooms were made into sitting rooms for other things. There are services there. It's a Catholic institution, and they have concerts and teach Latin and all kinds of things there. So I was called in to renovate it and revise it in such a way that its function changed, and a lot of specific things I did too. When they put the new addition on, they put the front door over where there's, I don't know, you can't see my finger there, can you? There's a lower door with lower window with green shutters. Before I came aboard, that window was over below this other window, this second floor window, and the front door was where the green shuttered is now.
Are you talking about this spot right here?
Yeah. Now, why they didn't put the door in the right place in the first place, but 30 years later, I came aboard and moved the door where it belongs.
So the door had been here.
Yeah.
Okay. But you moved the door over there.
Yeah. I can only say I put it in the right place. No invention. I just did the right thing.
Mm.
And we renovated the roof, and I put 4 new dormers on the roof and put an extra floor in there, and changed the use of many of the rooms. I guess that there's a lot more pictures that you could show, but not. Anyway, again, you walk in here, you'd never know that I was around, that I had been part of it.
Well, in this case, Al, I knew you were around because we have a really great teacher at the school named Allison, and she's friends with Mr. Haas.
Yes.
And Allison and Mr. Haas gave me a tour of the home of the institution recently, and I just thought it was amazing, just lovely.
Good.
So, yeah.
Allison's terrific.
Yeah.
The organization is called the IIC, the International Institute for Culture. And it's distinctly Catholic, but it doesn't, that's not really its trademark. It's devoted to the same kind of thing that Studio Incamminati and I are interested in the continuity of culture. One of the things that I think we owe so much to Latin. Nobody runs around speaking Latin anymore, but I think a fundamental education in Latin is good for everybody, and that's one of the things they emphasize here. Anybody can go here and learn fundamental Latin because it helps understanding other languages and words like incamminati and.
You're here, sure. All right.
Good. Next.
All right. Next one. The Wyatt residence.
Oh,
in
good.
Pittsburgh.
I don't know how much time we have. We don't have to spend a lot of time on these, but this is a favorite building of mine too. And this is from the ground up about 20 years ago, I guess, 15 years ago, maybe. Whoa. It doesn't have the date on it. But it's remotely modeled after the Villa Rotonda in Vicenza. It doesn't really look like the Villa Rotonda, but they have a lot in common. Is there an interior shot of this?
I have one interior, 2 pics on the next slide, which are absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
So would you tell us about these a little bit, please?
Well, the one on the right has a dome. This is the entrance. Mm. And the sitting room is off to the left. One of these doors, not one of the doors you see, but another door. It's octagonal in the middle, and then it goes to a dome at the top. And all the buildings, all the rooms, bedrooms upstairs, and living room, dining room, and stuff, and kitchen, all radiate from this central space. And it's largely original. I don't know that it really closely resembles any other building I've seen, because it developed as I worked with the client, talking about their needs and their desires and what they had in mind. So it's kind of a merger of ideas that I had, Italian, and ideas that the client had that were more English. And when it all comes together, I think it's profoundly American looking. I don't think you'd think this was anywhere else, but I mean, it has a Georgian look about it. I don't think you'd identify it as anything but all American.
I'd like to ask you more about it if I may, because and I have to preface my questions by saying that I am conscious of sounding idiotic, but I want to ask about the control over the internal aesthetics of your design. I would assume that you, of course, thought through and brainstormed through the shapes and the materials like the marble,
Oh, absolutely.
but how much of the colors, the materials like the wood, uh, the 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 fireplace, how much of that was your doing? Everything, right?
Well, as I mentioned, the owner had an idea more of an English Palladian model. Because Palladio was Italian, but
Hmm.
and I had more of a, so it was a combination of the client and the architect that determined most everything. I drew all the little details. I mean, I composed everything, but with his uh, acquiescence and enthusiasm. Um, I'd have to say most of it was agreeable. I mean, a lot of these ideas didn't come to his head, but he had in mind that this ought to be paneled. Now, how the paneling was broken down, but definitely this was as good a merger of client and designer as I've ever had, because there's a heck of a lot of detail. That one of the reasons that this is as beautiful as it is because he was sympathetic. I mean, we had an alignment, um, but he was the builder as well. So
Mm.
he had plenty of time to do this, and he had good craftsmen working for him. So and he's a very successful builder in Pittsburgh, and so it was a combination. I mean, we best of all combinations where the owner, the builder, the architect are all working together in a very harmonic way, which is the way
Uh,
the world should be. Which is gets me back to the classical principle
mhm,
of the three.
mhm. I remember going to a collector's home in Atherton in California, and it was in a very upscale neighborhood. And we went to a friend's home, and I was so underwhelmed. I wonder, do you find this builder, this client, is it a rarity to find somebody this astute in aesthetics and
Yes.
the importance of the environment? Okay, good, good. I don't feel strange then. Um,
No, but there are lots out there, and growing, and there's um, all this kind of detail is actually available nowadays. There are companies that are turning out this this kind of work. You can literally buy a lot of this stuff online, I guess.
mm,
Um, and there's catalogs that you can look up this stuff. So you don't you need a good architect to assemble it properly. But much of this is actually newly available now
mm.
in ways that it hasn't been quite a long time. There's definitely a movement back, which I like to call the New American Renaissance. Um, American Renaissance, it depends on who you're talking to and what exactly you're talking about. But generally speaking, if we're talking about the history of American architecture, the end of the 19th century has been regarded by many as the American Renaissance. And basically, it comes from the Chicago World's Fair of 1892. Things had gotten a little out of hand in the Victorian era, you know, wild, a lot of beautiful buildings, but kind of a wildness of different shapes and forms and stuff. And then the World's Fair brought it back to classical, and nations from all over the world came together and contributed to this enormous and beautiful event. And that is often referred to as the American Renaissance. That lasted for the first part of the 20th century, but was blown away by the Second World War when all building ceased. And then when building began again, it was on totally different principles, as I've talked about before, for a variety of understandable reasons, but still tragically, the tradition that was revived in the American Renaissance, clarity and harmony and firmness, commodity, and delight, was blown away in the Second World War, and is only now beginning to resurface.
That took us into the City Beautiful movement, where they rebuilt parts of Washington, D.C., and added that incredible John Russell Pope Archives building, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Great remnants of that time. Do you want to see the next slide?
Yeah, and this National Civic, oh, pretty, yeah. It's really nice looking at these on an unfamiliar platform like this.
So this is, I couldn't find any additional photos of this. This is the Henry Clay Frick II residence in New Jersey, correct?
Yeah, right across the river from Manhattan. Yeah.
And was this, go ahead, please.
Well, I guess this is I got this job again through the work that I was doing in New York at the National Academy of Design, and not sure quite what the relationship between the Fricks, how it came together, but it's a almost entirely new building. That was built on the foundations of an earlier building, and I don't know, sweet as can be. I wish there were photos of the inside because it's very, very comfortable. It has a, certainly looking at this, there's a stately quality to it, but the scale is such that it's all quite comfortable. You know, I mean, you're not overwhelmed by a building like you walk comfortably up to this. Somebody's standing on the balcony. These, you know, these are about 3 feet high, so a person, a 5'6" person is comfortably, you know, got his elbow on this, and it's very homey. There's, I think it's got a lot of class, and it certainly looks costly, but it is not overwhelming in any way. It's
Those are 3 feet high, right?
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, balusters. That's one consistency in the classical manner. Balusters are pretty much always 3 feet high. or 2.6 or, you know, but I mean, balusters have got to be human scale.
Mm-hmm. It is interesting to hear you talk about proportion and the importance of proportion in what you do.
Yeah, and how it relates to the human body, you know, or a door, you know, ought to be kind of door sized in relation to a person walking through. And if it's a much bigger door, frequently it's broken down into the door that actually opens and not the, unless it's a great portal that crowds move in and out of, you know, but
Mm.
still, and a windowsill is pretty much, you know, it's about 3 feet, 4 feet,
Okay.
a little lower.
Okay.
You see how comfortably a person standing there would look.
Well, it's also interesting that these last two structures were from the ground up, correct?
Oh yeah.
So you did everything.
Yep.
Fascinating. Shall we
Also
go?
base and metal and you know, the 3 parts and how the balusters up here and oh, interesting. These are what was the story? These are acorns. Uh, what did I have up?
Those?
Yeah. Oh, what I had drawn originally were urns that that Henry Frick didn't like at all. I didn't know why but he got up and left. And it wasn't until his wife Emily told me that they reminded him of funerary urns. And he was old, and many of his friends had recently died, and he saw these little urns as dreary. So when I replaced them with acorns, he was delighted because he's got a lot of oak trees on the site. And I mean, it's one of his favorite things. Trees are among his favorite things. And acorn meant for him, you know, something new and you know, growing a seed that is going to produce more. Fascinating. And I didn't have a clue at what turned him off of the urns. And I wouldn't have known until I tried out the acorn what it was about it that pleased him. But his wife clued me in. She didn't tell me to make the acorn, but when he was delighted, she was able to explain to me exactly what he loved about the acorn, and he went on himself. So, you know, there's a lot more to architecture than well, traditional architecture anymore than you know, floors and ceilings and walls.
Mm-hmm. Michaela is asking, is the structure on the inside metal studs or wood? I'm not quite sure if I understand her question completely. Do you get what she's getting at?
Yeah, it's all wood.
Okay.
It could be. I mean, it could be other. I mean, it needn't be wood, but this in fact is all wood. Very very conventional, traditional
Mm.
structural components. But there's no reason you can't do this in steel, you know, too.
Mm. All right, interesting. I have another couple of images. You want to move to the next one?
Sure. I am very happy about this one too, because when I went there for the opening ceremony, there was a party afterwards, and a variety of people came up to me afterwards saying how they loved it, what tickled my fancy, especially the first three or maybe four, introduced themselves as, they're not Catholic. One, I don't remember, but completely different faiths, all of whom said it reminded them of their own faith. I mean, this was strictly Catholic, but I mean, the pastor, but it wasn't my intention to make it ecumenical, but something about how it all turned out, again, in conversation with the pastor, Bob Woodbury, gave it kind of a universal quality. I don't know whether everybody would think it has universal familiarity, but it certainly did to the people that came. I'm talking especially about the choir, the choir that sang. Members of the choir thought it related to their own faith, as it's what they liked about it, the comfortability of it.
I love this quote. I think I might just read it because I think it refers to us in our conversation, and it's from Pastor Woodbury. He said, "The chapel in its architecture and liturgy expresses that living continuity with the past, which the church understands as tradition. This is not a historical deposit of dead forms and practices, but rather the living experience of a community of faith growing organically from one generation to another under the creative power of the Holy Spirit. The better this tradition is known and understood, the easier it is to respond to its rhythms and draw upon its resources to answer the needs of our own day."
Yeah, I love that.
That is fantastic. I mean, that could be inserted into any meaningful conversation about the visual creative practices, what he is talking about the blend of the environment and the faith and architectural relationship. It really is a universal statement, right?
Yeah. Yeah, very beautiful.
Fantastic. Well, I have another image here. This is my last one of your work. I'll go right to it. I may have lost a small amount of that slide at the top. My apologies, but it's the Grand Federal Edifice in Philadelphia. Could you talk a little bit about this, please?
Yeah, there's an organization in Philadelphia called the Carpenters Company. Carpenters Company of the City and County of Philadelphia. It's called the CCCC. And it started out basically as a builders, as a carpenters group, but over the years it includes all kinds of building contractors, and most of them are building contractors now. They're not simply a carpenter here and a plasterer there. They're more general contractors. And nowadays they include architects. So I've been a member ever since I was asked to design this float. And you see, this is modeled after an 18th century newspaper description of the float. I was asked to design it. I didn't have a picture of it, but I had a newspaper description of the one that the Carpenters Company took through down the road in Washington, well, in Philadelphia, at the celebrating the adoption of the Constitution. So on the bicentennial of the Constitution, they wanted to do it again, but they didn't know what it looked like, except the verbal description. But they knew that I knew how to do traditional looking things, and I was asked to do it. And That's me in the red suit there in Washington, standing there on the float. Yeah, as I say, this is in Philadelphia where the Constitution was adopted, and this is in Washington for the
That's you?
yeah, right there. And it was for the inaugural parade of George Bush. So, and he was over here and he waved and I waved back, and he wrote me a little note, actually. I've got it in the office on the wall. There were 13 columns representing the 13 colonies, and the dome represents the dome of heaven, I guess. The fact that there were a couple of the first time the parade took place, 2 of the colonies hadn't joined, and so we kept the columns off for 2, so there are only 11 columns there. Let's see, Dome of Government, I should have rehearsed. I don't remember exactly what this what the top little pavilion is.
How about the figure at the very top?
The figure is oh gosh, what's her name? The goddess of plenty. Oh my. Sorry, can't remember. Certainly I know that. But she has a cornucopia that she's holding, and she represents plenty. You know, wealth, basically.
Opus?
Hmm?
No. Fortuna?
No.
Opus?
No. How strange.
Okay.
It's too bad because I have her in my office.
Okay.
I mean, we're hoping to get it reconstructed and put in the National Constitution Center, but we haven't succeeded yet.
Pomona? No. Okay, we'll think of it later. But that certainly explains the lack of space there. 2 of the columns were missing, right?
Yeah,
Series.
they were very when this parade took place for the bicentennial. The 2 states were very angry. Other people were angry too that we hadn't put the columns in, because the columns, you know, the states were part of the United States now, so it's kind of mean-minded. It wasn't my idea to not put them on, but the idea was that they weren't there originally, and we were just trying to recreate what there was originally. So I don't know. Gee whiz, I'm going to stay up all night trying to think of who that is. Fortuna, no, is not, but Goddess of Plenty.
Pam mentions it as Ceres. No?
Could be.
I'm finding.
Or Demeter, maybe?
I thought it was Pomona. No? But that's the Roman goddess. It's okay. You can get back to us. We'll try to figure it out together. How about that? I included this image, by the way, because of your work in preservation, and you know, your work looking at the past, at past construction and architecture, and I'm fascinated that you got the description out of an old newspaper.
Yeah, but you know, the rules then for putting it together were you know, there's a continuity of rules. I mean, it didn't tell me what kind of, they told me there were Corinthian columns, and I know what Corinthian columns are supposed to look like, and things like that. But if you know the rules, you play by the rules, and you, the results are probably going to be good.
Got it. Al, how does Demeter sound?
That sounds good. I think it might be. I would call her Demeter, though.
Okay.
But some people call her Demeter. Where are we? So we've been to the tradition that is fundamentally progressive. Have we discussed that at
I think I should stop sharing and we should talk a bit about that.
how much time do we have? Are we ready to talk about the Bach building?
I think we could go and move into whatever direction you want. I would like to entertain topics that you want to talk about. The Bach building was our question 5 for tonight. And so if you would like to talk about that, we could certainly go there as well. What you want to talk about, what you like about the Bach building and the new space?
Yeah, these days, on the heels of that tempestuous election, and with the country so divided, right down the middle, kind of, I think more than ever we need that third element. There's this and the that, and then there's the mean between the extremes, and there's the thing that unifies us. There's that member between the horizontal and the vertical that brings them together and makes a oneness out of our country. So there are so many ways in which the classical tradition, as taught by Incamminati or me, wherever, or wonderful Notre Dame University has the only almost purely traditional architectural program, but there are other little ones here and there. But this is so important for the whole country, the whole world, really, to get back to some of these fundamental ideas, these conceptual notions, that focus on the oneness, the unity. What's our common understanding? And the digital world is really done a lot to prevent that. I think it can be overcome, and I think we're on the way. More than ever, I think the political, the left and the right, gosh, Republicans, Democrats, it's hard to really to identify what the traditions of the two are. But they ought to be aligned. I mean, they can have different points of view, but they ought to be able to see the common goal and move toward that. And this is how tradition has always worked. And that is why I say it's fundamentally progressive. And that is why I think that the one of the goals of the Institute for Classical Architecture and Art is to create the new American Renaissance, which brings us back to these fundamental ideas of culture and society, let alone, what's a good looking building supposed to be. I think it's wonderful that Studio Incamminati is occupying the Bach building now. because it was built, well, I like it especially because it was born the same year I was born in 1936. We have a real, a fundamental numerical relationship anyway. It's as old as I am. But it also represents pretty much the last gasp of the 2,500-year Western classical tradition. Its style is definitely in the tradition. It's kind of stripped down. It's very modernist looking. I mean, you wouldn't mistake it for a classical building exactly, but it has all the classical elements that we prize in other styles. As I say, the tradition has had many stylistic differences over the years. And in this first half of the 20th century, we were looking at the most modern of the classical architecture. And it has all the elements. It has an image from a distance, and then as you get closer, you see other aspects of it. And as you walk in, you see other details that relate to the human scale. And oh my gosh, its corridors are lovely. You see it, and the way it hits the sky is terrific. That all the roof decks up there that you can go to and sit on and see the rest of Philadelphia. It has all the characteristics of the best of the classical tradition, even though stylistically, I guess you would call it Art Deco, which would not be confused with the Baroque or the Art Nouveau or but Art Deco is probably the best you can call it, and it's of its time, absolutely, but it also shares all those aspects of the classical tradition. So it's a good place for these guys to be working, and the studios are comfortable, and it's also good because it a lot of good relationships in there. Studio Incamminati is just one of a wonderful assortment of, as far as I can tell, like-minded groups. Very good artists, craftsmen, all very much involved in the same kinds of things, with the same ideas of what a society ought to be. Makes me very happy to think of, and it must be happy to be there. Although, I guess you're not there as much as everybody would like to be until the pandemic. Does that pretty much say it? How much is it occupied now? I mean, I know a lot of the stuff is distant learning.
We're mostly there. We are a life-based school, and we believe that everyone learns best in the traditional way. And we are being safe. We're being socially distant and conscientious of each other's health, most importantly. And yet we recognize we have, and generations long tradition to study within. So we're there. We're in-person learning right now within Bach, and it's incredibly inspiring. And what a difference the change of environment has made to the school itself, to the feel, and even the identity of the school. So you're right.
I'm sure, yeah. Very, very exciting.
Could I ask you, this may be an impossible question. Could you define beauty?
No.
I
That's
mean,
a that's
I
an easy
kept thinking,
question. No, the answer is no.
I'm not going to take no for an answer though, Al. If you had you mentioned a couple of times the idea of beauty and classical architecture versus Bauhaus in a strict sense. And I kept thinking if you had an auxiliary word or two or three, and you did mention the word continuity a couple of times, would you add that to a kind of list of closely associated words that um, aspire to the notion of beauty?
Well, harmony comes to mind first, but then harmony is not that easy to define either. But where all there's a unity in the complexity, where all the elements uh, relate to one another in a harmonic way, in an integral way, as if they're all parts of the same thing, like all parts of our bodies relate clearly to every other part of our body. Um, the parts of a tree all relate. The leaves, to the branches, to the twigs, to the branches, to the trunk, to the roots. There's a continuity, a harmonic relationship between part and part, and that certainly pleases us in a way that makes us smile. Now, how does that how that actually works is really very hard to define. I mean, you can talk and talk and talk about harmony, but some musical harmony is a little bit easier because of the actual harmonic relationships are fairly easy to define, and if you're not right on, then you're distinctly off, and there's a kind of a bad vibe there, a clash,
Dissonant.
dissonant, yeah. So I mean, you can pin it down pretty well in vibrating strings. You double the frequency of a vibrating string, and the tone goes an octave. And everybody can understand. Everybody can recognize an octave. Men and women in singing in church are frequently an octave apart, and they're singing. They're looking at the same note on the page, and they think they're singing the same note, even though it's an octave apart. So that's easy to define. Double the frequency of the tone, and you get an octave. The thirds and the fifths are a little different, more difficult. Fourths. But the arithmetic ratios are very easy to define, and if they're off, you know they're off. So I guess it's one of those things you recognize it when you see it, whether you know exactly what you're looking at or not. That's why I was quick to answer no.
Smart answer, actually.
But it's a harmonic relationship between all the parts that gives a sense of unity to a kind of diverse organization, and
Well,
we
yeah.
strive for that in buildings and paintings and whatever. It's good if you look at a glance and see aha, rather than, oh, here's this and there's that and this that and there's that, but they don't seem to be part of the same canvas.
Right. Well, I would agree completely. I mean, beauty is an impossible thing to define, and in many ways, an impossible pursuit, but a goal worth pursuing because the pathway to that goal is transformative, wouldn't you say?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Well,
And it's that's one of these things that brings painters together in an organization. But so much of painting over the long run has been done by uh, large groups of people working on the same ceiling or working on the same wall. And in that group, you're supposed to be able to paint just like the master is painting, because you don't want to see all kinds of different autographs on the painting. You want to see the unity. But so it's everybody's role to join in this unified effort to create one beautiful ceiling or painting or mural, uh, and it is good for you, and makes you feel good when you're all contributing to the same goal. And when you break away from the atelier that you've been working with, start your own, then you can compete. But you're competing to, you're both moving toward the same goal to make something beautiful. And it's a friendly competition. It's not something that separates you.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Are we going to lose him, Nancy? You're taking him back from us?
Well, I'm just wondering how long it's going to go on. I'm hungry, but
All right. Well, we uh we really appreciate you loaning him to us. He's brilliant, and you've loaned him to us for many years, and hopefully many more.
good, 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 good.
All right, Al. I
Are
want
there,
to thank you so much again for
I don't,
doing this. It's
we've
been
got
delightful.
is it time?
Well, it's 8 o'clock.
It's 8 o'clock. You know, when your wife says it's 8 o'clock, I'm not gonna stand in the way of your marriage.
Having fun for 2 hours.
Too much fun. Um, are you good, Al? Any parting words you want to offer us?
No, this has been, I tell you, I was looking forward to it, for sure. I had a lot of apprehensions, for sure, not being, having a clue as how these things were going to be done. But I can tell you, this has been entirely enjoyable, altogether enjoyable. There's
I've
20
been
more things I want to say, but I'm not going to.
well.
Bring me back.
What we could do, there are a lot of questions that have been left on the table. I wonder if after the fact, I could forward you some questions. We had a few from Natalie and from Michael, so I may send you some offline if that's okay.
I'd love to see the questions. Yeah.
All right, wonderful. You guys have a wonderful meal, and thank you again. This was spectacular. Okay, thank you.